is Carolyn Abel, Tift County resident, tax-paying citizen. Mr. Robinson, I have my questions for you. I'm familiar with the fair tax because I read the book. I know that the book was written with the federal government in mind to apply the fair tax. I believe you were implying that you would like to apply it at the state level, and if I'm correct in that, would you please elaborate on how you would do it?
It's not exactly a fair tax at the state level because the fair tax on the national level, the bill that John Linder, Georgia representative, proposed, is all current forms of federal taxation, tariffs, everything would actually move to one fair tax. It's not what we proposed here in Georgia. What I'm talking about here in Georgia is actually realizing that our state tax code is a World War II vintage tax code that every 20 years they take it, dust it off, play with it a little bit. It was essentially written shortly after World War II. We need to have a modern 21st century tax code for a modern government. Actually start and write a new modern tax code. That new tax code does not need to include a tax on productivity. Other states can run without an income tax. We can do that here in Georgia. You don't have to double the size of the current sales tax to get rid of the income tax. Figures show you can do it with a 2% or 2 cents on the dollar increase, or in some cases less. That's if you kept current exemptions. You could even adjust some of the exemptions. Right now, there's an exemption on food. If you got rid of the exemption on food, you'd need a negligible adjustment on the sales tax. So it's reorganization of how we pay tax. I'm not actually suggesting that we necessarily pay less tax. I'm not going to promise you that. What I'm saying is we need to re-examine how we pay tax. That's the key. There's nothing wrong with paying taxes. It's a necessary evil. I don't like it. You don't like it. But we're going to have taxes. We need to hold government's feet to the fire and make sure they're responsible and good stewards on how they use tax dollars. But we also need to examine how we go about paying it. And I believe fundamentally, and I will never change, it is morally wrong to punish people for being productive. One thing that distinguishes Americans from the other peoples of the earth is that we know how to produce. We're the hardest working people that God ever put on this planet, and you don't punish them through an income tax for doing what comes natural to American citizens. That is morally wrong. I don't care what government entity tries to levy it.
Can I respond to that? Generates about $9 billion. It's approximately 50% of state's revenue. A 1 cent sales tax in the best of economic times has generated $1.5 billion. So if you do quick math, is it 6%? And 6% is what it takes just to offset the income tax. The sales tax on groceries. The sales tax on groceries, if you restore the sales tax on groceries, it generates somewhere between $600 and $700 million a year. It might generate a little more than that today because of how much groceries have gone up today. But you're still $8.4 billion off of what the $9 billion was. Email that I got yesterday, 17.5% down is what we're facing for state revenues this past month alone. Public education gets about 50% of the budget. 92% of the dollars that we put into education go directly back to your local school systems. And if we cut the budget and we take money from the local school systems and they turn around and increase your property taxes, then we haven't done you a favor. And what I would respectfully submit, and this is why we need to debate on this very issue, because it's talked about in every meeting that we have, we need a specific debate on this issue so that we get the facts on the table. Every state without a state income tax has higher property taxes. And offsetting income taxes, reducing income taxes, and having the end result of higher property taxes is not acceptable to me as a gubernatorial candidate, and it's not acceptable to me as a taxpayer. I'd ask you to consider one other thing when you talk about sales tax. Whatever you pay in income tax is deductible to you on your federal tax return. Whatever you pay in income tax is deductible to you on your federal income tax return. When you talk about increasing the sales tax, you're talking about increasing it on your power bill, you're You're talking about increasing it on a piece of lumber that you buy to build a house. You're talking about increasing it on your cable bill. You're talking about increasing it on each and everything that you do. And none of those things are going to be deductible to you on your federal income tax. The end result of that proposal is a higher net tax burden on the vast majority of Georgia citizens. And I appreciate your question, and I'd love to see us have a debate on that specific issue.
Let me address this as far as the state sales tax goes. One of the things that Austin's not taking into consideration here, I don't believe, is the fact that if we went to a simple state sales tax, when you calculate in the illegals who are currently not having to pay their fair share of all the services, when you factor in all of the tourists who like to travel to or through our fair state because it's the gateway to anywhere you want to go in the southeast, what would happen is the total number of taxpayers here in Georgia would go up. So no matter how you add up the taxes, the total amount of taxes being taken in, even if government wasn't cut at all, the total amount of taxes needed would still be the same, but what would happen is that for you who are an honest taxpayer, the total amount of taxes that you personally are paying would come down because of the increase in the number of taxpayers. Let me also say this. I very well understand one of the concerns that Austin has pointed out today, and that is that any time a state tries to stand up and assert our constitutional rights under the 10th Amendment, what the federal government does is exactly what Austin says. He's a good student. He's been listening to me say this a bunch. The federal government holds those taxes over our head, and they tell us what we have to do to get that money back. If anybody else did that, as he said, we'd call it bribery or a number of other things. But what we've got to do, there is a solution that's part of American history. The way it was done for the first 100 years of American history is that when people owed any kind of federal taxes, individuals didn't pay federal taxes. They paid those taxes to the states, and the states paid whatever taxes were lawful and constitutional to the federal government. One of the things we need to do is the act that Bobby Franklin has introduced, that's going to be in the General Assembly in January, is the State Authority and Federal Tax Funds Act. It would state that all federal taxes owed by Georgians would be paid to the Georgia Department of Revenue, and then the State General Assembly would do their constitutional duty and look at all federal appropriations, and only those federal appropriations that are constitutional would be funded. And the state of Georgia would then send that percentage of federal tax dollars collected from Georgians onto Washington. Everything else would remain here at home to do those things that are necessary and constitutional in the state of Georgia. And I have people all the time that say, you can't do that. You're telling the federal government how you're going to collect their taxes. Well, folks, that's the way that it was done for the first 100 years of American history. So if you want to really restore power back to the people and to the states, restore the authority of the purse strings. And that's where it's going to start. It's not going to be an easy battle, but it's a battle that we absolutely have to fight so that they can no longer hold those strings over our head. If you want to look at the legislation, you can go to my campaign website. All 10 of those sovereignty bills are located there at georgiafirst.org.
Let's give Eric a chance. I think the broad agreement up here, which is what I was saying when I was talking earlier, is that the preferred way to tax ourselves is within the consumption tax, because it captures the underground economy. And I think all of us up here seem to be saying what we prefer to lower is the income tax. So that's where I stand. I don't think we can eliminate the income tax, but I do think we can eliminate exemptions, raise consumption taxes, balance it to lower income taxes. That's where